Welcome to the Blue Economy CRC webinar series for 2025. I'm Professor C.M. Wang from the University of Queensland, and I shall be facilitating this webinar. My co-facilitator is Professor Lindsay White from Auckland University of Technology. Firstly, on behalf of the Blue Economy CRC, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we work today and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this webinar. I pay my respects to the elders, past and present. The Blue Economy CRC was established to undertake industry-focused research and training to support the growth of the blue economy with a focus on two new emerging and transitioning ocean industries for Australia, namely offshore aquaculture and renewable energy production. With now 43 participants from Australia and around the globe, the purpose of the Blue Economy CRC is to perform world-class collaborative industry-focused research and training that underpins the growth of the blue economy through increased offshore sustainable aquaculture and renewable energy production. You can see on the screen here the vision of the Blue Economy CRC, that is the vision is to make Australia blue economy industries in offshore sustainable seafood and co-located in renewable energy globally competitive and at the forefront of innovation and underpinned by a robust environmental planning and management framework that consumers trust and value. So I now pass it to my co-facilitator, Professor Lindsay, to tell you about the webinar today.
Thank you, CM, and welcome everyone to this webinar. I can see people still coming in. We've got quite a large group attending this today. So today's webinar is on a topic very close to my heart as a seaweed biologist. So we're talking about offshore seaweed cultivation. And I'm really happy that the Blue Economy Cooperative Research Centre has taken seaweed cultivation very seriously, and it's a large part of our portfolio of aquaculture species. And this webinar is going to explore some advances in deep cycling offshore seaweed aquaculture, led by the Climate Foundation, along with the Blue Economy CRC. This is a technology that has the potential to revolutionize ocean regeneration and sustainable economies. And the talks will be led by Dr. Brian von Herzen, Dr. Joe Rauch, and Steve Hamilton. And the first part of our session will be led by these folks. And we'll talk about sort of automation, scaling, and commercialization of these offshore platforms. And this is going to be followed by Professor Jeff Wright from the University of Tasmania, who is going to talk about one of our big projects on commercially scalable hatcheries and grow-out methods for offshore cultivation of kelps. So you're going to get to learn about some of the ecological benefits of offshore seaweed farming, as well as the potential for carbon removal, alongside the engineering and operational strategies, from remote command to control and structural design. And these are making large-scale, cost-effective deployment of seaweed farms a potential for coastal communities across Australasia. And so I'll now hand it back to CM to introduce our speakers.
Yes, so please welcome our four guest speakers who will be presenting for us today. First speaker will be Dr. Brian van Herzen, who is the CEO of Climate Foundation Australia. He will be presenting on the automation and scaling of deep cycling offshore seaweed mariculture. The second speaker is Dr. Joseph Rauch, who is a senior technologist at the Climate Foundation. And his talk will be on From Lab to Ocean, 5 years of scaling, automation, and remote operations in marine permaculture. The third speaker is Steve Hamilton, who is a senior systems engineer at the Climate Foundation. And then we have the fourth speaker will be Professor Jeff Wright, who is a seaweed biologist and ecologist at the Institute for Marine and Antarctic Studies in UTEST. And he will be speaking on the optimizing the cultivation of giant kelp in eastern Tasmania for offshore production. Now, Q&A session will follow after all 4 presentations. So please place your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Now, without further ado, I will hand over the microphone to our first presenter, Dr. Brian Van Herzen. Brian, please. You're on mute, Brian.
Thank you, CM. It's a pleasure being here today. And of course, the Climate Foundation is very, very happy to be and proud to be core members of the Blue Economy CRC. We're here to talk about half a decade of progress that we have made in offshore seaweed cultivation and addressing everything from Category 5 tropical cyclones to nutrient challenges and to get to commercial scaling. So it's really been quite an odyssey, and we're all looking forward to sharing with you today the progress that we've made over the past half a decade. With that, I'll share my screen, and let me know if there are any problems with the screen sharing, but I'll start out, and Dr. Joseph Rauch will follow up talking about some of the 5-year implementation journey that we've had, and Steve Hamilton has done some engineering analysis of the tensegrity platform that we have today. That is the quarter hectare scale that we have already, and then I'll come back with plans for the future. So first, I'd like to start out with talking about a global problem that we face today. The oceans are absorbing over 90% of the global warming that's occurring in the ocean today. And what's really dramatic is the amount of scaling that's the rate at which global warming is accelerating. Professor James Hansen spoke just earlier this week about the accelerating rate of global warming. We've gone from approximately 0.18 degrees Celsius per decade to temperature increases exceeding 0.4 degrees of warming each decade. And the oceans are on the front line of this climate disruption, particularly with the changes to the International Maritime Organization policy on marine aerosols, and with the decrease in clouds, marine clouds, that have been documented over just the past 2 to 4 decades with NASA Sirius satellites and other observations, we see a dimming of ocean planet Earth, and that rate of imbalance is accelerating the rate at which the ocean's warming. The adaptation methods and carbon removal methods and climate repair approaches that we're going to talk about today work to address all 3 legs of the climate triad, and I hope to discuss that with you. I would say across the Western Pacific and the Indo-Pacific, but I will say also I'll touch on the Mediterranean, since we've seen such enormous temperature increases there of up to +8 degrees Celsius in the Western Mediterranean ever since the IMO has transformed their policy with respect to sulfate aerosols as of May 1st of 2025. So this is a dramatic, enormous acceleration in global warming that is occurring, and the IMO is actually on notice as to what they're doing, and yet they're still doing it. So this is a very significant issue for marine science, engineering, and technology and industry as we go forward, that we should understand fully as we proceed. Now, closer to home here in Australia, we are looking at ocean warming in Tasmania that has exceeded, in some cases, +5 degrees Celsius sea surface temperature anomalies. These enormous anomalies have actually had a devastating effect on seaweeds around the world, but in particular, look at from Tasmania with up to the tropics in the Philippine Sea, where we've been working in the Comodo Sea on tropical seaweed cultivation, which of course has great import for the northern half of Australia, where tropical seaweeds are bound. This picture is a very interesting rendition of the 3 world oceans. The Pacific Ocean is shown here on the right, and the red zones represent high temperatures and decreased natural upwelling, and the blue zones are increased upwelling. And you'll notice at depths of up to 150 meters, a dramatic decrease in the amount of natural upwelling that's occurred over the past 20 to 60 years, as evidenced by this Nature Climate Change paper by Lee et al. Now, the Southern Ocean is represented in the middle, and then the Indian and Atlantic Oceans on the left. But you'll notice that all 3 of the oceans, in the tropics and subtropics, dramatic decreases in natural upwelling, which decreases the supply of primary and micronutrients that are needed for healthy algae to grow. So this represents a huge challenge, and I will say this is a problem as far south as Tasmania, where we have seen a dramatic fall off in natural kelps, and as far north as the Canadian Arctic. So this is a huge effect, but you can see in some ways the tropics are at the front lines of climate disruption today, and that's what we're dealing with in particular with our site in the Western Pacific Ocean, where I'll describe in more detail in the Philippines. This is a picture that Professor Johnson from IMAS has described of the decrease in maximum bed size and extent in eastern Tasmania. And this is a dramatic fall off, as you can see. 95% of kelp forest lost in eastern Tasmania. And some of the work that Professor Jeff and I have been working on are to research how could we use marine permaculture and other technologies to actually restore some of the ecosystem services that are being lost today in eastern Tasmania. Now, it's not limited there because in Western Australia, we have seen a transformative shift of over 1,000 square kilometers of Eclonia kelp forest. This is the common kelp that covers the Great Southern Reef, 8,000 kilometers of southern reef in Australia that is actually physically larger and in some ways economically larger than even the Great Barrier Reef. And yet to see 1,000 square kilometers of that reef transform from a beautiful Eclonia kelp forest to turf algae has been a dramatic shift. This occurred just in the last decade during a giant marine heat wave. And as you can see, ecosystems are bistable. They're stable as a kelp forest, and they're stable as an urchin barren or a turf algae. And you can see this shift that occurred in 2012, 2013, and it hasn't come back. We lost 1,000 square kilometers of kelp forest there, and we've been losing 1,000 square kilometers or more of kelp forest in the Eastern Pacific with similar challenges in Northern California and around the world. And with that, you can see that under an RCP 8.5 scenario, that we're dealing with a decrease, and those are the blue zones, in net primary productivity. And I've got to tell you, folks, unfortunately, I wish we were at RCP 2.6, which is 2.6 degrees above normal by 2100. But unfortunately, it's burn, baby, burn. And so, like it or not, we're on the RCP 8.5 scenario. And that means dramatically decreased primary productivity across vast regions of the Indo-Pacific, affecting Australia in particular. So we're going to have to utilize techniques like deep cycling and deep water irrigation in order to sustain the levels of primary productivity that our civilization developed on, and to keep the life in the ocean, literally, for 10 billion people and 8 million species. That is the challenge and the opportunity that we face today. And so seaweed is part of that narrative. In other words, there's a lot of microalgae around the ocean. There's a little bit of macroalgae. What's great about macroalgae is you can hold on to it. So when it's on a platform, you can manage where the platform is, and that makes it easy to manage, easy to harvest, and quite fast growing. I was astonished that we had some not only red seaweeds, but green seaweeds that have grown so quickly. And I'll show you some of those results as we go. Well, what is marine permaculture? Well, marine permaculture has many dimensions, but one of them is the availability of those deep nutrients that have been lost previously. And what I want to describe is how we started out, and Joe will detail this. We started out providing upwelling, and this is what we called bringing the mountain of seawater to Muhammad, the seaweeds. And that is a big deal because it takes we estimate close to 1 million cubic meters of seawater a day to fully irrigate a full hectare in ocean currents and all the rest. That's a lot of energy, and Joe will detail just exactly how much energy later today. In contrast, deep cycling is an approach where we take the seaweed, Mohammed, and bring it to the mountain at night. And under that approach, you actually lower the seaweed at night, and it goes below the thermocline, below the nutricline. The seaweed acts like a sponge and absorbs nitrate, phosphate, and micronutrients into its tissues at night. And at sunrise, we lift the platform up to the surface where it absorbs sunlight and carbon dioxide in the top meter of the sea. The great thing about that is this combination of deep nutrients that exist everywhere in the ocean, just 100 to 200 meters below the surface. And surface carbon dioxide, which is in daily, if not equally or weekly, equilibrium with the atmosphere, That combination provides a true blue carbon sink, as well as providing food security for humanity and other species. So this represents a real opportunity. It doesn't deplete surface nutrients from phytoplankton, and that's really important because it keeps the primary production high, but it accesses the mesopelagic layer of nutrients between 100 and 1,000 meters deep. And that supply of nutrients is really key. There's, I think globally, you've got years to decades of supply in the epipelagic zone, the top 100 meters, but you have thousands of years of nutrients available in the mesopelagic zone, and it's continually being renewed by the deeper layers of the ocean and the nutrient supplies that are replete in the deeper ocean. Now, our inspiration to actually do some of the deep cycling has been further augmented by a very old technology. Way back in the 1400s, we had in Europe and elsewhere cable ferries that would go across a river, often with manual labor, and would cross those oceans back and forth. And that's a great bit of history over hundreds of years. It turns out right here in Australia, I had the chance to ride a cable ferry in Noosa that crosses the Noosa River, and it's on a series of cables that go back and forth. And the cable ferry technology is relatively simple. I can use manual power or diesel power or electric power. And we found that to be an inspiration on developing a tensegrity structure that would be able to effectively raise and lower the platform by remote control without requiring a lot of submerged moving equipment to have a really good result. And we'll look forward to getting into that in more detail. So this is, seaweed has historically been very near shore and shallow water. But as you know, that's a very thin sliver of ocean coastal area, and there's a lot of contention for those resources. Being able to go further offshore does two things. It provides access to deep water just by going down and up 100 meters. And that deep water, of course, is replete with nutrients. And it reduces the contention for coastal resources because, Australia is, of course, a big ocean nation and one of the top three in terms of the exclusive economic zone in the world. And most of that is in very deep water. Fortunately, the marine permaculture, as depicted behind me, is it makes accessible for seaweed cultivation all waters greater than 100 meters deep, which is about 99% of the ocean. And so this represents a big opportunity to do this. We early on used a single point mooring and a ring that would go up and down with some support buoys. And that enables vertical motion, and it uses orders of magnitude less energy than it would otherwise. What's also significant is the increased growth rate. And we have charted from May 2020 through to the present day, the increase in seaweed growth that is depicted by the green and blue lines relative to controls that we're trying to grow in the surface waters, which are, of course, usually depleted in nutrients. And as you can see, a dramatic difference of 100 to 300% growth rate per month for red seaweeds in contrast to controls which didn't grow very much starting in 2020 and beyond. Now, what's interesting about this is that these red seaweeds were getting growth rates of 100 to 300% per month, but we actually have some green seaweeds as well that are growing 100% per day. And in fact, in some of the Japanese laboratories, they've demonstrated up to 300% growth per day. So it's just astonishing to see these kind of growth rates, especially when you have access to replete nutrients with marine permaculture and replete sunlight with the deep cycling approach. These results have been reproduced in subsequent years as well. And these were trials in 2022, trials in 2023, and beyond. We've been doing ongoing trials and at larger scales up to the present day. In addition, this primary productivity has great benefits for coastal communities. There's close to 250,000 seaweed farmers in the Philippines, many of whom are underrepresented and underserved. So it's providing coastal livelihoods and diversified income streams, not only for the cultivation and harvest of seaweed, but also the coastal biorefineries. We're developing transportable seaweed biorefineries that help process these seaweeds into a variety of products, including food, feed, and fertilizer products. But as you can see, we've identified a dozen value chains for those seaweeds. In addition, it provides restored fisheries, which are really essential. And it also helps to increase habitat for forage fish and also primary production. And those ecosystem services are essential for a healthy blue economy and a healthy blue ecology. So we're really looking to see how can we, with food, feed, and fertilizer products, and we're very happy to say that we have now gotten our first product registration for biostimulant in the Philippines, which is one of several products in the pipeline. They include feed supplements, they include food ingredients that have been well established in a multi-billion-dollar industry. And that's in addition to the ecosystem services that are available. And at higher volumes, we'd love to look for applications for the remaining parts of the seaweed with these biorefineries that can include cellulosic feedstock for biofuels and fiber and many other applications. The seaweed value chain includes not only the cultivation of seaweed, as we've described here at the top left, but the harvesting and processing with the biorefinery, the production of liquid biostimulants and solid dry pulp for carrageenan and other products. And I would be remiss in not mentioning that 20 to 40% of the seaweed growing on our platform falls off the platform during growth, especially when there are wave events or wind events, and sinks 1,000 meters a day to the abyssal seafloor, where it can remain for centuries. Notably, the sediment diagenesis is also significant, and when the seafloor sediments include calcium carbonate, the seaweed clumps that land on the seafloor can actually also be digested and respired, and they produce carbon dioxide and carbonic acid in the pore spaces. And furthermore, there is some diagenesis or conversion of calcium carbonate sediments into calcium bicarbonate. And the fraction of the seaweed carbon that goes into bicarbonate is dissolved in the ocean and has a lifetime in the ocean of 100,000 years, which represents a true blue carbon sink orders of magnitude longer than otherwise. So that's really a key aspect of this. You know, one thing I like about marine permaculture is that we consider it to be a marine stellar technology. There is a new book out by one of my mentors at Stanford, Tony Seba, and it's called Stellar. And the definition of stellar is very precise, actually. And that is that once the system is built, it can continue producing for years, if not decades, on its own. Now, marine solar, solar in general and marine solar in particular is one example. Once you build the solar panel and the battery, you now have a source of power for decades. And this ultimately can be abstracted to the notion of zero extractive inputs. Once the system's built, it keeps running, and it can be reused and recycled. I've got a number of secondhand solar panels myself at my house. And it has zero toxic outputs. And that means that we reuse everything. It's a cradle to cradle approach. And what this does is it closes the ecosystem and it closes the economics. And I think we need to work on land and sea in developing these stellar technologies because they produce regenerative abundance, not only for food, feed, and fertilizer, for energy security, and even automation, but also for regenerating the primary production on our seas and our soils. And that's where the regenerative abundance comes from. So it's an abundance of energy, an abundance of food security, and an abundance of automation that I think will actually bring us to a very hopeful future in just 1 to 2 decades. And we're proud to include marine permaculture as a marine stellar technology. So this is some of the examples. Marine permaculture meets all 3 of these criteria, and we're looking forward to identifying what new marine and coastal and land-based stellar technologies can we apply right here in Australasia as an example for the rest of the world. So we're thrilled to include marine stellar in this focus. We are focused in Australasia. We're based here in Australia, and of course we have our flagship location presently in the Philippines, working on the front lines of climate disruption, where we've seen the most disruption to upwelling of nutrients today. And it's about restoring that nutrient supply from the deep that is really key to keeping our oceans alive from Philippines to the tip of Tasmania. So with that, I'll describe some of our early trials. This was off the coast of Hawaii, and it started actually back in 2007, 2008. And we demonstrated that algae would grow with access to deep water nutrients. And we did this in 18,000 feet of water depth north of the island of Oahu. This was the first of actually 4 projects and at 4 phases, if you will. And that is we completed the upwelling testing, the supply of deep nutrients that way. We continued in the Philippines with, and actually I should say that we were very honored to receive a Blue Economy Challenge grant from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in 2016, which got us launched on our first upwelling program, that in Indonesia, which we completed in 2018. And that has led to, again, further development in the Philippines, where we were able to set up our team there. And in 2020, demonstrated this trough-based system, approximately 10 square meters, followed then by phase 3, which is 100 to 1,000 square meters. And now we're in phase 4, and that is 2,500 square meters, and with great plans now to actually extend up to a full commercial hectare that will be within the next 12 months in 2026. So we're very happy to have this scaling to full commercial scale and our new certificate of product registration, which means that our first marine permaculture products are authorized for production and sale in the Philippines. And we're looking forward to an import permit to Australia to first import the biostimulants, then import the transportable seaweed biorefinery, and then start growing, hopefully, some seaweeds and kelps offshore eastern Tasmania, hopefully with Jeff, to actually regenerate the primary production of kelps and other seaweeds in Australian waters. And we have really an economic development plan that has 3 phases. The first product are the liquid biostimulants. The second stage is actually the biorefineries, as I've discussed. And the third is, as the demand for seaweed increases and the wild supply decreases, the price will go up, of course, and that's where we introduce the marine permaculture platforms and deep cycling that can be done offshore out to 300 kilometers, exclusive economic zone, and of course, tens of thousands of kilometers of coastline. So in the future, we anticipate that when you're flying from one point to another over the ocean, you might see crop circles of seaweed that are a bit like the crop circles that you see on land today. And there's no reason that we can't turn our blue ocean. It's a blue ocean opportunity in the sense that there are millions of square kilometers and billions of hectares of mostly empty ocean that is available for this kind of seaweed cultivation today. And with that, we have a scaling vision. I'm going to be handing it over to Dr. Joe Rauch, who will talk with you about our marine traction buoys, about our new architecture, tensegrity structure, and Steve Hamilton will follow up on the tensegrity structure, dynamics, and mechanical engineering for this quarter hectare we have today. And of course, I can wrap it up with plans for a full hectare in 2026. Joe?
Hey, thank you, Brian. I'm Dr. Joseph Rauch. I have been with the Climate Foundation since 2020, where I joined after graduating from Brandeis University with a PhD in physics. I met Brian at Woods Hole Institute on Cape Cod and was inspired by his vision, and so decided to join up with the foundation after I graduated. And so, next slide. And so I'm going to be telling you the story of our progress from our 10 square meter trials in 2020 up to our 2,500 square meter system that's currently running right now. And so I'll talk about the 10 square meter first. Next slide. So we were primarily focused on upwelling at that time. And the idea was we would grow seaweed in these sort of swimming pools in the ocean. And you can see in the center image that on the left-hand side, we have a pool that's filled with cooler water. We've upwelled from 300 meters. And on the right-hand side, you can see the control seaweed. And then in the other images, you can see the difference that the upwelled water had on the seaweed growth. The seaweed on the left-hand side is much darker and healthier, whereas the seaweed in the control trough was lighter colored, not as healthy, and eventually actually died during the trial. However, though successful, we ran into a number of problems, primarily with scaling. Much more than 10 square meters, and the swimming pool doesn't really work anymore. It's just too unwieldy. And if you're upwelling water into the ocean, you need to upwell a lot of water to have an impact on the seaweed. And so the energy demands became too high. We found it was roughly an equal area of solar panels to growing area in order to upwell enough water to actually support that growing area. And so after that, next slide, we decided to turn our sights onto deep cycling. And so instead of bringing the nutrients to the seaweed, we decided to bring the seaweed to the nutrients and lower it down at night where the seaweed can absorb nutrients from a higher concentration in the deep water and then raise it during the day so it can absorb the sunlight it needs as well. And next slide. We found this to be massively more energy efficient, up to 3 orders of magnitude. And that allowed us to scale up on the next slide to a 100 square meter system. So in 2021, we started deep cycling with 100 square meters, and we were testing various configurations from how deep do we lower the seaweed at night to how deep do we keep it at the surface during the day, as well as different ways of seeding the seaweed and starting to look at different ways of automating the harvesting. But our success with these trials allowed us to continue scaling up, next slide, to a 1,000 square meter system in 2022. And again, we found we were having a lot of success for this system, but this is where we again ran into scaling problems. This was the single point mooring design that Brian introduced earlier, and the problems were in the name, single. We had too many single points of failure. It wasn't modular enough, and when we would have a problem and we weren't able to raise the seaweed, it could be detrimental to the seaweed's growth if it wasn't receiving sunlight at least every 36 hours. So just like, next slide, just like we say goodnight to the seaweed, we said goodnight to that idea, next slide, and we put it to bed. Next slide. And so we started exploring our current design, which actually allowed us to immediately scale up to 2,500 square meters. You can see real pictures of it on the left and what we call our tractor buoys, or on the right, and what we call our tractor buoys on the left. And I'll describe the system a little bit more now. Next slide. So this is a diagram of the photo you saw in the previous slide. It's a bird's eye view, and you can see in the center we have a rectangle or seaweed array, and then off each corner there is an anchor that holds the system together. The white bubbles on the corners of the seaweed array are weights and counterweights, and then the black bubbles in between them are our attraction buoys. And so if you go to the next slide. This is an elevation view of the system. And on the top half in A, that's with the seaweed platform at the surface. And you can see the traction buoys in red are close to the seaweed platform. And then in the lower half in B, the traction buoys have moved away from the platform and the seaweed platform has lowered to depth. And so by controlling where this traction buoy is, we can control what depth the seaweed is lowered to. Next slide. And so these tractor buoys are very small and very modular. And we've found that has allowed us to continue operating the platform without issues for over a year now. If there are problems with one of the traction buoys, the system is still able to get raised, and we can swap the traction buoys out very easily so that we can have one traction buoy on site getting maintained or repaired while still having a full set of traction buoys out operating in the water. And along with these traction buoys have come massive steps in our automation. Next slide. And so as Brian mentioned, we presently have a remote controlled system that we can control through a phone app. It gives us information on all of the buoys from various sensors in the distributed around the buoys, as well as just immediate control of how deep we want the seaweed to go. We're improving our automation, and we soon hope to have it fully automated, where the seaweed will raise and lower itself even without the remote. But presently, we're very happy with our progress. It's allowed us to open our operating envelope because we don't have to be on site with the seaweed to raise and lower it anymore. We're unconstrained by weather events, and so we're able to continue lowering and raising even if it's poor weather or if a storm is coming in and you can't go out. So unfortunately, this was part of our experience at the end of 2021. Super Typhoon Rauch hit the Philippines, and in particular, our site was right close to the eye of the storm, and it devastated our work site. We lost basically all of the infrastructure and trees on the site, and we were down and couldn't operate for roughly half a year. One silver lining we found, however, was that our seaweed survived. We had prepared it by lowering it 10 meters below the surface to get it out of the storm swell. And with just a few floats supporting it on the surface, it weathered through the storm such that we were able to help other local seaweed farmers replenish their farms by giving them some of our seaweed, which had survived. And so that is another aspect of the design and the upwelling or the deep cycling system that is crucial in that it is very survivable through major weather events. So next slide. And so with that, I want to summarize that our designs through these last 5 years have scaled up from 10 square meters to 2,500 square meters. They've become a lot more modular and redundant, allowing us to operate through many different failure modes. And they've become a lot more, 3 orders of magnitude more energy efficient, and as well as providing storm resilience. And so with this, I want to give a special thanks to our team here in the Philippines that you can see. They've been absolutely wonderful, and it's one of the great joys of my job to continue working with them. And now I'd like to pass it off to Steve to tell you a little bit more about detailed engineering about the design.
Thanks, Joe. Good afternoon, everyone. Dr. Joe and Dr. Brian have described to you the pioneering work that they've done to get us to this point. Now I want to share with you some of the modeling work that we've done as we look forward to the next generation for this platform. I want to be very clear about the context in which I speak. The dance we're performing is a 4-step dance, and we're on step 4. The science has been done to show the theoretical benefits. The technology was developed that actually demonstrated those benefits in the real world. And in fact, that technology has been deployed in a commercial endeavor. So we have a working platform today. Seaweed is being harvested from it. The final step in this dance then is to scale this platform for better economics. We want to first scale it from a current 1/4 hectare to a 1/2 hectare. And then we want to scale it, doubling again from a 1/2 to a full hectare. And all this doing all this while we're also reducing the cost to deploy the platform. Now you'll notice that I used the word infrastructure when I described it. And that's probably not a precise word, but I guess what I'm trying to describe is that it's not just a static structure. It's part building in that it's fixed in one place and has to be stable there, but it's also part vehicle in that the traction buoys move up and down along it. And it's part machine in that it actually must be stable, not just in one point, but in a whole series of points. Now, we rejected the divide and conquer design approach in favor of a model-based design to wring every last bit of cost out of this scaling. The model then is our spec. It's the first thing we did, and we refine it every time we learn something. We use it actually to set the requirements for the components of the design, and we work from the outside in. So the ocean's going to pound on the the network, and so that's where we started. And then the building's going to pound on the vehicles, so that's where we go next. We have two requirements. One, we want our building not to fall down, and two, we want the machine to continue working. Now, no doubt the ocean is a tough environment to work in, but the civil design process is the same. Namely, the load and resistance factor design process is the same. The LRFD method is a formal process by which you can intentionally derate the strength of the materials you use and intentionally overrate the loads that you will foreseeably encounter. A well-designed building has enough derated resistance to withstand the worst-case loading as margined. Now, the LRFD process is set up so that these factors can be chosen by experts for specific structure types. Now, we found no good fit for permaculture platforms, but we took the best guidance we could from what was out there. Still, it's absolutely true. The hardest single thing to get right in structural design is accurately predicting the worst case combination of loads that your structure will encounter. Okay. Now, I said earlier, I described the platform as a machine. It has to be stable in a whole series of points, and these define a continuum between net up and net down. There are 5 primary elements that make up this machine. We have the anchor itself. Then we have the intermediate weight that we add in the midpoint of the line. Then we have the subtractor buoys on the surface. And then we put weights on the corners where they attach the mooring lines attached to the growth net. And then finally, the platform itself. Now, the structure that we're implementing is a specialized type of frame where each of the members act always in either compression or always in tension. Now, you can look at that picture there and you can try to guess which of the members that are in tension and which are the ones that are in compression. And of course, it's a trick question because of the 10 members, I'm only showing 7, and the 7 are all in tension. So we use the ocean floor as a compression member. And the water columns underneath the 2 buoys actually function as compression members as well. Now, officially, this is not a tensegrity design, but it's about as close as you can come. Compression members in tensegrity designs are not allowed to touch. The ocean touches the ocean floor. But just as in any tensegrity design, the stability in our structure requires that all 7 members remain in tension at all times, under all loading conditions, and in all positions. Now, before I really worried too much about where it would be stable, I first wanted to get a handle for how it moves. The elements are going to be constrained both by geometry and by load forces. Geometry will determine where they can go. Load forces will determine where they will go. So I used a modeling tool from 3D space to create a constraint of the geometries and just observe what the degrees of freedom of motion were. And that was an informative experience. You can see here on the top is a drawing of the nets, both raised and lowered in still waters. But in a strong current, you're going to have a sideways force, and that has some impact on where the net then moves. Now, this was really important for us to understand because current flowing across a level net is going to provide drag forces only on the edge. Current flowing across a tilted net is going to provide surface drag as well. And so it became clear to us that it was important to model that. So we did. The surface from the current is going to create a pressure on the surface. That's going to be relatively uniformly distributed because the speed is relatively constant. It's going to create a parabolic profile. And that profile is going to be inverted and slightly tilted so that the upstream side will be tangent to the current flow. And so you can use all this to calculate the mathematics behind it and produce the formula at the bottom there, which is how we modeled the force that the current will provide on the surface as a tension force into the tensegrity network. Now, as an element of good planning, Dr. Bryan had engaged University of Queensland already to do some FEM studies on the hydrodynamics of the net. And they found many of the same things that we predicted. So you can see on the right here that the AquaSim results show that the distance from the platform to the buoys is shorter on the upstream side than the downstream side. So that's an indication that you would have tilting. And then on the left-hand side, you see clearly, although the current's in a different direction, that they're showing in the modeling that they did that we have some non-linear, non-flat nets. They're curved. Once we had the loading model for the platform, for the net, was the last element then to put together our equilibrium model. Now, the 5 elements I described to you, the anchor is clearly the least interesting. And so what you have here are the free body diagrams for the remaining 4 and the equations that go with them. And we modeled the buoyancies, the weights, the drag from the current, and then of course the tensions in the wires. All the equations ultimately reduced down to just 4 dependent variables. And fortunately, with 4 equations, we have a solvable system. So then we took that system and we implemented it in a spreadsheet, where each column in the spreadsheet represents an interesting corner case, varying the speed of the water, the position of the net, the position of the tractor buoys along the traction lines. And one of the key questions that we had as we considered the Gen 1 design buoys for design was how much buoyancy did they need? And from this modeling, we can actually provide an estimate of what we're currently using. And then fortunately, a couple of days later, they were pulling one of the buoys out for some cleaning, as you can see. And if you look at the barnacle line, it's a pretty good match to what we had modeled. So that we're using these kinds of techniques to instill confidence in our model. And when we find things wrong, we update that model because we need it to be accurate. And with confidence in that model, we then are able to create parameterized versions of it to model the most difficult questions about LRFD loads, right? How much buoyancy do we need? What kind of motor torque do we need? What's the minimum actual strength? And then what kind of performance are we going to get for the net rising and lowering given things? So with this approach, we've been able to create design targets for Gen 1 that are first adequate for the job, and second, optimal for our budget. And speaking of budget and economics, I think Dr. Bryan has a few more words.
Yes, thank you, Steve. This is great, and you've done a great job of describing the past scaling and now the economics and the engineering behind the subtractor traction buoys. I want to highlight for a moment where we began, and that is back in 2020, the cost of the first hectare would be a full $3 million. That was our estimate based on the technology there. With the evolution from upwelling to deep cycling, and ultimately from a single point mooring to a tensegrity structure with surface buoys and no moving parts underwater, we were able to have a dramatic decrease in cost. And in fact, our first quarter hectare, we're estimating that our existing buoy set will cost less than $100,000. That's for a set of 10 buoys, and that's $10,000 per buoy. And now, with the help of Joe and Steve and our entire Climate Foundation team, we're actually building the Gen 1 systems that are going to be targeting under $5,000 per buoy, and that means less than $50,000 per hectare in 2026. This represents a more than 50 times cost reduction over the past half a decade, and is exactly the kind of stellar abundance that we hope to bring forward. Not only have we reduced the cost of the system, but we've also increased the functionality, both with automation, being able to raise and lower these platforms remotely. On your mobile phone, you'll be able to control an entire fleet of marine permaculture hectares in the future from the comfort of your phone, using cellular networks, microwave, and ultimately satellite Internet of Things communications. And so with that command, control, and telemetry, it will be very automatable. And then finally, as Joe has so aptly mentioned, we'll be able to have this climate resilience that is going to enable the withstanding of tropical cyclones and very effectively. And we've demonstrated not only the survival of the platform with tropical cyclones, but we've gone from a 6 by 7 meter platform depicted behind me to a platform that just measures 1 by 2 meters with plans for even smaller. And that's essential for the surface buoy resilience because our surviving the Category 5 typhoon, Super Typhoon Rai, was based upon having very small buoys at the surface that are just buoyant enough to keep the system at the surface, but when the waves get very big, it does not couple the energy into the submerged platform. And so this is an essential aspect as we go forward. So the miniaturization and modularization of the subtractor traction buoy technology will be key to building a worldwide industry and a healthy industry in Australia that will enable this to go well. I want to just close by saying that it's important that we're addressing all three legs of the climate triad. Not only can we identify decrease in carbon intensity of 30 to 35% from the use of our biostimulant in agriculture applications with reduced fossil fuel fertilizer and reduced nitrous oxide emissions, but we can measure the 20 to 40% of seaweed that falls off these platforms during growth and sinks 1,000 meters a day to the abyssal seafloor, where it remains for centuries. And this represents a true blue carbon sink that will remove carbon from the atmosphere and return it to the deep ocean, where there's already 40 times as much carbon as the atmosphere and plenty of room for more in the middle and deep ocean. Finally, I would like to touch on the fact that we are on the front lines of climate repair, that to sustain our civilization, we're going to have to not only bring emissions to zero and ultimately design 2,400 gigatons of carbon removal, but we're going to need locally and regionally to keep our climate healthy. And we're alarmed by the decrease in clouds that have occurred. We can see with the pictures here on the left, the role of ship tracks in brightening our ocean planet Earth. And the key thing with climate repair is that these seaweed forests and other algae forests are instrumental in providing the biogenic cloud condensation nuclei that keep our summertimes cool in Eastern Australia all the way to the Philippines. And this is nature's way of rebrightening ocean planet Earth and getting us back to a healthy climate on our coastlines and our communities. And I note with interest that 95% of all of the Australian population is living within 100 kilometers of the coast. Now, what happens when we lose these clouds? Well, the IMO has done the perfect experiment now with the Mediterranean. They cut off the aerosols in May of 2025. When we ask the question, why is the Mediterranean burning up? Why are the wildfires in Greece? It's the 8 degrees Celsius temperature anomalies resulting from the loss of aerosols. So this is the largest aerosol experiment on the planet this year. And you can see the results, +5 to +8 degrees Celsius temperature anomalies. We do not want this to happen in Australia. And that means let's rebuild our kelp forests and our seaweed forests. Let us rebrighten our coastlines, our regions, and our communities, and show the way that we can actually rebrighten ocean planet Earth and get us back to a healthy climate with healthy carbon balance in the years to come. So we have a group called Rebrighten. Check out rebrighten.org. And I'm very happy to hand it over to Professor Jeff Wright, who will talk more about how we're working to, how the Blue Economy CRC is working to regenerate the kelp forests. And we're very happy to be working with the Blue Economy CRC on our phase 2 project to simulate and scale the marine permaculture to hectare scale and to bring it to Australia. And with that, I'll turn it over to CM. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brian, Joe, and Steve, for sharing it with us the importance of growing seaweed and also your wonderful new seaweed cultivation infrastructure that has the capability of doing deep cycling to accelerate the growth of seaweed and also to cultivate seaweed in where waters are lacking in nutrients. That's remarkable. Thank you so much. You make us excited to all of us to get into seaweed cultivation, not only to make money, but also to save the world. Okay, so with that, I pass it to Lindsay, who will introduce Jeff and also will facilitate the Q&A session thereafter. Lindsay, to you.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you very much, Brian. And Climate Foundation, we're now going to turn to Jeff Wright, who's going to tell us about one of the flagship seaweed projects that the Blue Economy CRC has funded on kelp growth. So, Jeff, it's all over to you.
Okay. All right. How's that, Lindsay? Can you hear me?
Yep. Awesome.
Okay.
Carry on.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Lindsay. So I'm going to shift the focus here a bit and move away from the technology and the infrastructure that the folks from Climate Foundation have spoken about, and focus more on the growing of the seaweed. And I'm going to talk about work that we've been doing in a project funded through the Blue Economy CRC, which has a number of different parts. And the part that I'll be talking about is this one, which is the work we've been doing to optimize cultivation of giant kelp, Macrocystis porifera, for offshore production. And it's a very large project team. Overall, there's more than 50 different people, but the names you can see there are the ones who've really contributed significantly to this part of the project around the cultivation of Macrocystis. So why giant kelp Macrocystis in particular? So Macrocystis is native to Tasmania. A review we put out in 2023 highlighted that it was a good candidate for offshore production. We know it's very fast growing, has high production. The hatchery and the at-sea methods are pretty well known. And so it was, we were pretty hopeful that we would be able to modify them for our context. There's been a bit of work done at IMAS at the University of Tasmania, testing for warm-tolerant strains of Macrocystis, largely because there's been a massive decline in Macrocystis in the last 60 years due to increasing temperatures and low nutrients due to the southern incursion of the East Australian current. So there are some conservation benefits that could come out of this work. And in addition, there's a number of potential uses for Macrocystis. So that's sort of the overall rationale. In terms of the local context, as I mentioned, and Brian touched on this already, Tasmania is a global warming hotspot. The east coast of Tasmania in particular is warming at around about 4 times the global average in the ocean. As well as being warm, it has very low nitrogen levels, which is an issue for Macrocystis, as it has relatively poor storage capacity for nitrogen. And as I said, the result of the changes to the local oceanography has been a massive loss in the local Macrocystis forests. And there's a whole body of work being done by other people at IMAS, which is all about restoring and regenerating those forests. But it's a good candidate for aquaculture. The overall project very briefly touches on these things. It touches on engineering issues, including some of the things that Brian was talking about. There was the biological component, which is about growing kelp. There was we had a part which was understanding the environmental impacts. We had a part which was trying to understand the economics of different scenarios. There was some really good work done on the policy and regulatory framework, and also some work done on site selection for any future projects growing giant kelp. And again, in the Tasmanian context, we've heard already from Brian in particular about the nutrient problem and the engineering solutions to solve that nutrient problem. And that was part of this some of that work was part of this project, in particular, not just the depth cycling methods that the Climate Foundation are focusing on, but also artificial upwelling approaches were a big part of this project. And the other part is, for us in particular, is about solving the temperature problem. We're dealing with a species that is being pushed further south because of warmer water. So in terms of how we tackled this, there are a couple of ways. One is to avoid the warmer temperatures, either in space and time, or to look at developing warm-tolerant cultivars that we could use, and we trialed some different cultivars in our work to test some of those things. So there were sort of 2 overall aims here. One was to establish scalable hatchery process for Macrocystis in our part of the world to provide seed stock for outplanting to a kelp farm. And the second one was to trial a number of different approaches for ocean farming, so varying or testing a number of different variables, including how macrocystis grew at different sites, at different depths, among different cultivars. We worked on the timing of outplanting. We looked at some specific things such as the substrate of the grow lines and the actual method of outplanting. There were a lot of bit parts to this, and not all of these were done at all the different places at all the different times. But I'll hopefully be able to unpack quite a few of these and show you where we got to in the end. So, as I said before, the hatchery methods were reasonably well established, and we used the standard approach, which is essentially to have seed stocks stored under red light. So the photo at the top left is each flask contains gametophytes that have come from a single parent, and those parents have been collected over a number of years by different people around Tasmania. And so we've got this seed stock sitting under red light in the lab. And once you remove the gametophytes from the red light, they start to develop and start to reproduce, and they then get sprayed onto these spools, which are pieces of PVC pipe wrapped in twine. The photos on the right, you can sort of see the progression from day 1 through to day 49, and that's just highlights the growth of the sporophytes over that time. Generally, they're kept in the hatchery for about 6 to 8 weeks before they're outplanted, and the typical way in which we did the outplanting, it's probably best shown on the figure F, which shows twine wrapped around a grow line, which is put at a certain depth at one of our sites. So that's sort of the standard approach that we use for all of our experiments. We did work at 4 sites, but I'm only going to talk about 2 of those. So we did the majority of the work at Tinderbox, which is not too far south of Hobart. At that site we deployed those 3 rings, which were small salmon rings, which came from human aquaculture. And we also set up a rectangular array, which was about 60 meters long and about 30 meters wide, and had 10 grow lines on it. So that was at Tinderbox. Slightly different setup at the other side I want to talk about, Tower Bay, which is the most southerly site and the site that's probably most exposed, at least between it and Tinderbox. And here there was already infrastructure in place, and essentially this was 3 paired surface lines, which were around about 70 meters long. So we essentially had 6 70-meter long lines that we could use, although there were other projects using those lines, so we didn't use all of them. So that was sort of our infrastructure that we used. Just to give you a bit of a close-up of what Tinderbox looked like. So the photo on the left shows those boys there, where the rectangular array was. So they would sit on the surface, and we'd drop the grow lines down to the depth that we wanted to work at. And further off in the distance, you can see the 3 salmon rings, and on the right you can see a close-up of the salmon rings and just one of the ways in which we deployed the seeded twine onto grow lines there. Tower Bay, the most southerly site, the photo just shows the paired lines, and as I said, there were 3 of these, and again we use these surface lines to attach droppers or down lines, which we then put at a particular depth where we had the grow lines that we were working at. So our focus was really on the sort of the research component and the experimental component. So obviously some of these methods are not that scalable, but some of them we think are. I'm going to talk about 3 rounds of outplanting that we did. The first round was done in June 2023. It was done at both of those sites. At Tinderbox, we tested different types of grow line that the twine could be wrapped around, so polypropylene, but also sisal as a natural fiber that was potentially more sustainable. We tested 3 cultivar treatments. So there were AI3 and PI3 were particular cultivars, one of which showed good thermal tolerance in the lab and the other which didn't. And then we also had a mixed treatment, which was essentially lots of different gametophytes from lots of different parents that were mixed together. And these were deployed at 2 different depths, 4.5 and 9 meters. And at Tower Bay, at the same time, we had tested the 3 cultivars, but we only put them at 9 meters. The second round we outplanted in December 2023. This was at tinderbox only, and we put out 3 cultivars, but we had no survivorship over summer. So these were all dead by February. So this told us that trying to grow Macrocystis over summer at that site was not going to work. And the third round we outplanted in May 2024 and harvested in November 2024, so a 7-month period. And again, at tinderbox, we tested 3 cultivars. We tested slightly different pre-seeding, slightly different seeding method. And again, we tested a couple of different depths. So either starting at 3 meters and keeping the Macrocystis at 3 meters, starting at 3 meters and dropping it to 5, or starting at 5 and leaving it at 5. And that at the second site, Tower Bay, we had the same 3 cultivars, but only outplanted at 3 meters depth. So I'll just run through what we found and pull it together at the end. So in terms of sisal versus polypropylene, sisal didn't work at all. So you can see that the photo, top left photo, you can see the twine wrapped around a sisal rope, and you can see no Macrocystis at all, and that's highlighted in that figure there. The numbered lines with the asterisks are the ones that were the polypropylene lines, and they were the only ones that had any Macrocystis surviving. In terms of comparing between the different cultivars, I'll just talk about the biomass that we recorded, but we also measured density and length, but the biomass is generally the most relevant here, and this is biomass measured as kilograms wet weight per meter. So you can see in the figure that's circled there that the biomass, the red dots are the averages across the replicates we had, and the green dots are just the individual replicates. But you can see from the red dots, there's not really that much difference across those 3 different treatments. And the other thing that's worth noting is that the really low biomass we get there. We're getting less than 0.25 kilograms per meter. So that was from June to November, but that was at 9 meters depth. So 9 meters appears not to work at that site. When we looked at specifically at depth, we found that the Macrocystis that was at 4.5 meters depth generally grew better than the Macrocystis at 9 meters depth. But again, we found then this was harvested in February, so this was after summer, and we found that we had quite a decline in the size of the individual sporophytes over the summer period, and we also had a pretty large increase in fouling. And again, we found in terms of the yields we got, we found really low biomass of the order of magnitude of 0.01, or around about that per kilograms per meter. So again, it highlighted that growing over summer is probably not going to be viable at this site. So we learned that polypropylene grow lines are the way to go. Shallower depths are the way to go. This is at tinderbox. We learned that the densities and size declined over summer. We learned that biofouling was very high in summer. You can see in those photos, there was some of the downlines that we pulled in towards the end of summer were just covered in stalked ascidians. So, if only there was a market for stalked ascidians, we might be right. And generally, we didn't find much evidence for difference between the different cultivar treatments. There's a different story at Tower Bay, so the site that was much further south. We only planted at 9 meters depth, and you can see the photo on the right. This is around about the time of harvest. We had plants that were around about 5-6 meters tall or more, but we were able to grow at this site for 17 months. So outplanted at the same time in June 2023, but harvested in November 2024, so 17-month period. And even though we saw a fair bit of dieback during the summer, the plants that survived regrew, and they regrew really well. And by the end of the 17-month period, we had biomass, average biomass of anywhere up to about 25 kilograms per meter, which is comparable to you know, the sorts of growth for giant kelp and other kelp in other parts of the world. And we also had, on average, the sporophytes were, you know, 5 to 6 meters tall. So at this site, it's possible to grow Macrocystis for more than a year, and eventually you get quite a good yield from that. So from that work at Tower Bay, you can just sort of see from these photos, the photo in the bottom left was in summer, and you can see that although the plants were looking pretty daggy and degraded, they were still surviving, and then they regrew once the conditions improved. So once the temperatures dropped and nitrogen started to increase, and then we got that good yield by November. So at this site, it's possible to grow Macrocystis at 9 meters depth, which it wasn't possible at Tinderbox. At this site, the plants survived over summer and then grew back strongly, and we got some good yields. It did seem like the mixed treatment performed better than at least one of the cultivars, and so this told us that at this site, at least, it's possible to have this perennial growth. So we can have the growth for more than a year. Round 3, outplanted in 2024, harvested in May 2024, harvested in November 2024, so a 7-month growth period. First at Tinderbox, so the site that didn't do very well the first time. We outplanted mostly at 3 meters, and that's what's shown in the circled, the figure that's circled here. So at 3 meters, with 7 months growth, we were getting biomass on average around about 8 or 10 kilograms per meter. So a much better outcome than the first trials we did at Tinderbox. And the photo, the plot on the right of that circled one just shows what happened in terms of the different depths. And so going at 3 meters was really the optimum here. I haven't shown you the pre-seeding, but we pre-seeded either in the lab, so wrapping the twine around the grow line in the lab, and then taking it out into the field already seeded, or doing the seeding in the field by swimming along the lines and winding the twine as we went. It didn't really matter which one we did. They both worked fine. As I said, the kelp that was shallower grew better. And again, there wasn't really much of a difference between the cultivars. But what we learned that even at this site, which has pretty poor water quality, it's possible to get a reasonable yield after 6 to 7 months of growth. So the yields of around about 8 to 10 kilograms per meter. The plants were sort of around about 2 meters tall. We found a similar thing when we did the same experiment at the second site, Tower Bay, although we found slightly higher yields, which is what you would expect given it was a slightly, then it's a better site with better water quality. So the yields here after 7 months were sort of in the anywhere up to 15 kilograms per meter. And with again, for this experiment, there seemed to be a pretty clear benefit. The mixed treatment seemed to be better than the 2 other individual cultivars. Yeah, so growth was better at Tinderbox. The mix performed slightly better. This is a slightly more exposed site, so there are some risks here, and there was some loss of the tops of the plants. Sometime before we measured that, sometimes the plants would be at the surface, so they were put at 9 meters, so they'd be sitting at the surface. But there was some damage due from storms. All right, so this is essentially a summary slide of all the different things, all the different experiments we did, and where we got to. So each one of these dots represents Macrocystis that was outplanted to different sites at different times, using different types of line, different cultivars, a whole range of things. Generally, as we move from right to left, it's sort of sequential in that a lot of the earlier stuff happened on the right. And then as we learned from that work, we sort of moved to the left and we started to get some much better outcomes. And just to sort of highlight the main outcomes here, after 7 months growth, this is for Tinderbox. The Tower Bay data isn't actually shown on this figure, but it's similar, slightly better. Growing for 7 months at 3 meters deep, we get a yield of around about 8 or 10 kilograms per meter. That was at both sites. At Tower Bay, growing at 9 meters deep, but for 17 months, we get higher yields. So we think there are two different approaches that could be taken to cultivate Macrocystis in our part of the world, and that's growing it as an annual or growing it as a perennial. All right, so that's the sort of in terms of conclusions, the first learning is that our results tell us that Macrocystis can be cultivated as an annual or as a perennial, and they obviously give different outcomes. We've also learned that the cultivation conditions need to be optimized for a given site. Okay, so we had to, particularly around depth, and that was evident particularly at Tinderbox, where a depth we thought would be good, around about 9 meters, the water quality just wasn't adequate, and so moving shallower enabled us to get some good yields. The timing of outplanting is also important, particularly if it's going to be for annual growth. You need to outplant just as you're getting into the cooler part of the year where the nutrients will be a little bit higher. The mix was maybe not often, but sometimes the best performer, but not always. And this probably reflects the fact that you've got lots of different genotypes and a lot of genetic diversity in that treatment, and therefore you've got individuals that can perform under the different conditions that might occur. Lots of different individuals. In terms of the drivers of kelp performance in cultivation, clearly temperature and nutrients are critical for Macrocystis, but also levels of light are important because that will determine the depth at which you can grow the kelp. But also biofouling, particularly during summer, appears to be really important. But overall, we think our work indicates that, well, what we've done, that we've got well-established hatchery and grow-out methods for Macrocystis, and that these methods are scalable for commercial purposes. So with that, I'll just acknowledge the Blue Economy CRC. They've been very supportive of not only this project, but as already indicated, of other seaweed projects. All the list of companies and other institutions down the bottom were all the partners involved in the larger project. Some of them were involved specifically in the work that I've spoken about in terms of the cultivation, but all of them are involved in some way or another. And I also we're really grateful for all the support we've received from within IMAS, for particularly field support. As you can see, there was a lot of field work going on here, and we had a lot of RAs and technicians, and also the IMAS operations team were incredibly supportive, and we're really grateful for that. And I'll leave it there. Thanks, Lindsay.
Well, thank you very much, Jeff. And to all of our speakers, thank you very much. That was a really good session and gives a good overview of some of the work of both the Climate Foundation and the Blue Economy CRC in collaboration with a whole bunch of partners, as Jeff pointed out. And I should say that the Blue Economy CRC's seaweed work extends beyond what you've seen here, and focuses on a range of species. One of them that I should mention is the work that we're doing in bull kelp, or Durvilia species, across Australia and New Zealand, bringing essentially a species into cultivation from scratch, which is a really cool thing that the Blue Economy CRC has done. I want to now move on to some questions. And so I encourage you, if you have questions, to put them into the Q&A window, where we've got quite a few answered questions already. So I see that Brian and Steve and Joe have been busy along with others in the chat window answering some of the questions. And you can read through the questions, both the answered and unanswered ones, and vote for them so that they sort of come to the top of the pile and get answered more readily. But I'm going to take the prerogative of being the one hosting this little bit to actually ask the first question. And I want to ask Steve a question around the modeling that you've done. One of the projects that the Blue Economy CRC has funded, which is being led out of the University of Western Australia, is modeling the ability of a seaweed farm to attenuate waves or attenuate ocean currents or waves. And it strikes me that while you've done the modeling on your farm that has the tropical seaweed Eucuma or Capophycus, which is quite a small sort of closely grown species to the grow lines. I wonder, what do you think the impact of your 2,500 square meter array would be, looking at those photos that Jeff was showing you about the big kelps growing on your lines?
Yeah.
I see the wry smile from Steve there. What do you
Well,
think?
like I said at the beginning, the process is the process. So yeah, the numbers are going to go up. I think we've seen that just in if you put out a growth grid that's newly seeded versus one that's been growing for a while and is mature, you can see clearly a greater drag coefficient, and then the structure responds to that. So you would need to design probably at a different design point for a different kelp that, as you said, bulkier. I think in particular, this is the work, the wave attenuation work that or issues that you were talking about, is the work that the University of Queensland was doing, looking at how much do surface waves impact the net when it's descended various depths and stuff. And so I think perhaps Brian can summarize that result, or maybe Professor Wang wants to step up and summarize it. So the work that I was doing was clearly a static analysis, and it was a basic point, and we would need to follow up with some dynamic analysis around it to look for like impact loads and stuff. And clearly there's going to be some of that, which their work already shows that it attenuates well, but it doesn't attenuate completely.
I guess I'll just close it off by saying that the results that are coming out of the University of Western Australia will play nicely into your models for some of the larger kelps.
Yeah.
I'll move on to some of the questions that haven't that haven't been answered in the window. That's been upvoted. There's a question from Kath there. I look for Jeff. Was there an improvement in the water quality at Tinderbox throughout the project, or was it fairly static?
Not noticeable, no. I think you need to, in terms of the kelp that we had on the lines, for a lot of that time there wasn't enough biomass, I don't think, to have any effect. And so the water quality we didn't notice a change. We did measure a number of different parameters around the water quality, and there were certainly seasonal fluctuations, but no obvious change over time. One thing that we did notice was that when there was a reasonable biomass of kelp on the lines, that there was an increase in oxygen really close to the kelp itself. So it does seem like that there can be those sorts of local effects, but exactly how widespread that would be, I think, is not really that well known.
And I guess as Brian pointed out, if we're going to grow seaweeds in open ocean settings, it's mainly going to be fairly oligotrophic waters, and nutrients on the surface are going to be quite an issue, hence the deep cycling. So there was a question asked earlier, probably best for Brian, around seaweeds that you can grow at depth, and what are the issues with seaweeds taking up nutrients at night at depth? What do we know about that, Brian?
Yeah, thank you, Lindsay. There are 14,000 species of red, green, and brown seaweeds globally, and using local seaweeds, it's possible to get most species of seaweeds to grow on these marine permaculture platforms. The nutrients are replete. We are doing presently a 2-year ecological and carbon cycling study with a number of university partners, including Princeton University, Rutgers, Scripps Institution of Oceanography, part of UCSD, and the National Taiwan University. We expect the data collection to be complete this year, and next year we'll be publishing the results of those ecological studies, which will validate and verify the replete supply of mesopelagic nutrients we expect based on the modeling and analysis. So we're very happy to have this very robust and multidisciplinary work underway, looking at not only at the primary production and the carbon cycling, but also the heterotrophy, the finfish, the herbivorous fishes, the zooplankton, and all the rest. And so we're very happy to be working with partners on that in an industry funded sponsorship and multiple universities and bringing those results to Australasia. Thank you.
Excellent. So there's a question in the Q&A around risk mitigation for introduced species, and the question is around Capophycus, and I guess we could add Eucuma into the mix, given that those are the main two species farmed throughout the tropics for their carrageenan production. It's an interesting question, of course, because these two species have been introduced throughout the tropics through cuttings, and there's currently no hatcheries technology for them. But maybe, Brian, you could comment on the spread of Eucuma and Capophycus in terms of risk.
Well, they grow pretty slowly. I will say the cat's out of the bag to some extent where the seaweed's already propagated. That said, we're big fans of using local species of seaweeds. There's all sorts we can do with that. There's so many locations have hundreds, if not thousands, of species of seaweed locally available, and there's so much we can do. I think when we look at the blue economy of seaweed, I think we've successfully domesticated and utilized just maybe 24 species. We barely touched the tip of the iceberg on 14,000 species, and we don't know what the bioeffectiveness is. I mean, so many medical drugs, pharmaceuticals, nutraceuticals, and cosmeceuticals are available with the hydrocolloids and seaweeds and other micronutrients. And so I think that barely a tip of the iceberg. I would encourage the development of local seaweeds. Most seaweeds will grow on marine permaculture platforms. We'd love to get one of these marine permaculture traction buoy systems down in Jeff's region so that we can actually test it with Macrocystis kelp in the future years. I hope that'll be a blue economy project in the future. It's something that we are enthusiastic about doing, and we're also really enthusiastic about working with CM and his group on modeling the hectare scaling in a phase 2 blue economy CRC project presently with EOI. So we think the future is very bright, and this can really open up Australasian seaweed development responsibly. And that means let's use local seaweeds, local fish, and minimize the introduction of new species.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Okay, so Joe, one for you here, perhaps, given your experience so far with the Climate Foundation. What do you see the biggest sort of pain points around the automation and operational cycle of this kind of seaweed farm?
Yeah, I think our biggest hurdle that's coming up is going to be around the seeding and harvesting technology. The buoys themselves are very nearly fully automated. And so the farm operation during the growth cycle is very nearly complete. You can see the finish line on it. For the seeding and harvesting, we use tube nets, and they can be a little labor intensive to create and seed presently. We have a number of ideas on addressing this, but it's going to take a little bit of a development, maybe half a year to a year development and work on it to really get it going.
Excellent. Okay. Let's see. So what have we got in the unanswered questions there? Got a lot of interest from all over the place, really.
Lindsay, you have to take only one question more because we are running out of time.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Are we closing it at 6:30 CM?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess rather than addressing some of the questions, which I think we've done a good job with, and I can see that we've got a whole bunch of questions that have been answered. Also, this whole webinar has been recorded and will be available and I suspect with the Q&A section. So I guess I'll just leave it open. Jeff, do you want to any closing comments on offshore aquaculture in general and the possibilities across Australasia in particular from your perspective?
Well, I think there are lots. There's a lot of potential. I think I think for in my thinking, and as I said, part of the project that I didn't talk about was around the economics. And the economics are driven by what the market is and the value of the product. And so I think for a lot of seaweed, and macrocystis is probably one of those, even though there are products and uses in Australia, the cost of production is relatively high. But so it's about finding the market. I think there are other species, and I think Lindsay, we're doing some, as you mentioned, doing work with bull kelp, for which there is already a pretty strong market for alginates and biostimulants. And so I think there's a lot of potential. It's just about selecting the species and for it to be economically viable, and making sure that the industries can recognize that.
Okay. Right. Well, I think we'll probably close it there. That's a nice
Yeah.
positive point to close it on, Jeff. Thank you very much. I think the popularity of this webinar was clear. We had several hundred people attending for almost all of the webinar, and another 300 that registered who may indeed download it and watch it later. So thank you very much to all of our speakers. Thank you very much, CM, for setting the whole thing up and hosting it so wonderfully. And thanks to the Blue Economy CRC for sponsoring the event.